Hey guys, this is Nate with Rooted in Revelation podcast, where we seek to make God's revelation our foundation in all life. And with me is John Barber, who is a professor of theology at Whitefield Theological Seminary in Lakeland, Florida. He has started two colleges in East Africa and travels to North Africa and the Middle East, researching the role of women in Islam. He is the author of numerous articles on Christianity and culture, as well as several books on this topic, including The Road from Eden, Studies in Christianity and Culture. How you doing, John?
I'm doing great, Nathan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming, brother. So uh, before we hop into talking about the topic at hand, would you mind sharing a little bit about how the Lord rescued you and how you kind of got into this project?
Oh man, I'd be happy to. I was a
Great.
teenager and was a musician, a very fine musician, and so good that I won some competitions nationally. My father was a professional musician. He was an opera singer in New York City, and so the pressure to perform was really high, and that pressure led me to drinking. And so by the time I was in senior in high school, I was drinking quite a bit and just failed to go to college after I graduated and was just drifting. Things were getting worse. I had a very short stint in jail. And I was just sitting there wondering how in the world did I get here from being a top class musician, and began talking with some people, some friends of mine, some people who were connected to churches locally. And one of my friends suggested that I go to Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, where I grew up, where this whole story was happening. And I met Dr. D. James Kennedy. And he is the one who came up to me. I was 19 years old. And he asked me the two evangelism explosion diagnostic questions. And frankly, I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was a guy in the church. And so that was it. He answered the questions for me, and the Lord used that word of God to transform my heart, to change my life, to give me new life, and to reconcile me to my Heavenly Father. And I've been serving him since.
Amen, brother. Thanks for sharing. It's very encouraging. Yeah. I have a similar kind of testimony. I came out of drug and alcohol abuse as well in my adolescent years and into my 20s, and the Lord pulled me out of that as well. So it's good to hear a fellow brother that experienced that, and the Lord's rescued. So thank you for that, John.
Sure. Love it.
Yeah. So you wrote this book called The Trees Have Goats, a story of Arab woman's struggle for love.
Right.
So how do you come up with the title? And I guess what's this book about as well?
Well, the book is about the maltreatment of women generally throughout the Arab world, and that would include North Africa, the Middle East, Southern Asia, typically wherever we find Arab nations. Now, let me say that this problem is not limited to Arab nations. Certainly, we have it in America. North America, it's rampant through sub-Sahara Africa, where I've worked to start, facilitate two colleges for very needy men who are going into the pastorate or are pastors, but without training. And so I've seen it everywhere I go, but the worst cases that I've ever seen were in the Arab world. And it really grabbed my attention when I saw three incidents on two different trips of men brutalizing or attacking women. And one of which I happened to know. I knew both of these people, a young woman and a young man. And when I tried to defend the young woman, I was shocked that she defended her attacker and was very critical of my imposition in the situation. And I would have thought that it would have been welcome, but in fact, it was not. And that really kind of got me interested immediately in the subject. And the reason is because my training is in theology, but it's also in the history of cultures, generally through Europe and in America, tracing Christianity from Europe to the early Americas and so on, and the history of philosophical debates around Christianity from Europe to America. Well, when I saw these incidents, I immediately knew that there was a window here to the culture. It just hit me. And I wanted to expand my knowledge base now to the Arab world and to understand what was going on. And I found that window by studying the man-woman relationship in Arab nations. And it opened up an entire world to me of knowledge and information and explained so many things.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. You'd think, and obviously intuitively in America, you would go to defend someone. I'm sure they would be appreciative of that. And that's that must have been, like you're saying, pretty eye-opening experience to go to try to defend someone. And they're kind of like,
and you asked me how I came up with the title of the book.
Yeah.
The Trees Have Goats. The novel is based in the nation of Morocco. And Morocco has the only argan forests in the world. Argan is a nut, and in the center is this delicious little bit of juice that is used for cosmetics and hair products and things in the world. And it's very succulent to the goats. The goats love it, and so they scurry up these argan trees. And if you've ever seen pictures of the goats sort of on a springboard out there on the edge of the limbs, nibbling on the argan, they swallow them, but they're not able to digest them wholly, but enough to soften them. And so they release themselves, and the women come and pick up the nuts. It's done manually years ago. And then they're able to break open and get the argan. Well, so many tourists have come from the world to see these goats up in the trees that the herders or the farmers keep the goats up there year long. And that's bad for the trees because they can never recuperate. The leaves never come back. The argan nuts never come back fully. It disturbs the entire process. And so the entire argan forests of Morocco were dying off. And so I looked at this and I created a parallel that the way in which the farmers are manipulating the goats and are killing off the agriculture, the men are manipulating the women and are killing the culture generally. And I talk about in the book how it is that when you step on one half of your population, how that's going to impede the growth, the infrastructure, and the future of any nation. And that's how I came up with the title.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's profound and a great illustration there, John. So as you're going about this, what did you learn in the process of talking to Muslim women? And then how did you get them to open up to you about these things?
Well, I learned an awful lot. I learned that they were really willing to talk as long as they knew that I wasn't trying to myself manipulate the story for my own personal gain. If they thought I could help them, they were more than willing to help me with my research. And I interviewed over 24 Arab women. And by Arab, I don't necessarily mean Muslim. So many were Muslim, some were Christian, some were atheist. But they all had the commonality of growing up and maturing in the Arab culture. And so they were extremely helpful. I think one lady was a little taken off her kilter because she came to the meeting with me thinking it was something else. And then the fellow who invited her told her, this is Dr. John Barber. He's interviewing women to learn about the abuse of women in the Arab world. And she wasn't very happy about it. But when I talked to her and was able to convince her of my intentions and what I wanted to do, she wound up being the most helpful individual to me. And her name is Rehab, and she is in the book. She's the second to last interview in the book. And the thing that's important about the interviews is that although the book is predominantly a story of fiction, how a agriculturalist or environmentalist, PhD from Florida, comes to Morocco and begins to research and to help the argan forests. And from there, the story develops into a fictional account. The interviews I did with the women are word for word. They're included in the novel, word for word, without any editing. And so as you read these stories, you're reading the real rich history and sometimes dire history of the women who helped me out with this. So I learned quite a bit. I've been 3 years now researching this, all the various ways that the women are abused, how the idea that we have this problem in America, so it's no different. Oh, it's very different over in North Africa and the Middle East. There are profound differences, and I've learned those and can share those in our time together.
Yeah, for sure. And so to what extent is domestic abuse of Muslim women a problem within the US and other Western cultures in comparison to specifically this area that you've spent some missionary time in?
Well, the statistics on domestic violence in the world generally are rather difficult to get a handle on because there are so many institutions and organizations, schools, universities that are researching this, and they all seem to come up with different numbers. And I can talk about those numbers in the Middle East and over in North Africa, which is the only area that the book is focused on. It's not focused on South China or Sub-Saharan Africa. But statistics in America are rather surprising if you read them just on the surface. They will tell you that something like 3 out of 4 women, for example, have faced sexual abuse of various kinds. Now, that's a very high number, but as you peel away at that 3 out of 4 and you begin to delineate the various things that are referred to as sexual violence, you might find out that it's something just like a catcall or not getting a job that somebody wanted. Sometimes these things are figured into the equation. So when you begin to tear it all down, the numbers are not quite 3 out of 4. For example, the rape statistics in America are staggeringly high if you look at them on the surface. But what it turns out is that much of that statistic, and there's so many different numbers floating around. If you look at the statistic, you find out that most of it is an attempted rape rather than an actual rape, which comes in at around 1 to 2% of American women. The Muslim women in America who have immigrated here are simply filed in or folded into these numbers of American women. And so there aren't any individual statistics to follow on the Muslim women in particular, or Arab women. They may be Christian or atheist, whatever they may be.
Gotcha. And why do you believe domestic abuse is higher in Muslim families and marriages than in, say, non-Muslim families, maybe in relation to like North American families?
Well, something popped into my head just at the end of my last answer to your
go ahead.
If I could just say this for a moment. One of the things that occurred to me about 2/3 of the way through the writing of the book, and something that I followed up on after the writing of the book has been on my mind a lot, is this thing called Islamoleftism that many people refer to. And it's the marriage of Islam and radical leftism in America. And anybody who's followed the culture wars here generally in the last months knows about the whole cancel culture movement, the CRT, get into the universities, the schools, business, government, military, all these different places. And were you to take a very close look at who is moving the pieces of the puzzle around on this cancel culture movement, there is a very strong linkage between Islam and the hard left in America, facilitated by the media. Now, if we take that paradigm for a moment and we peel it back even further, what we find is that many of the leaders in this, in the Islam portion of the Islamoleftism movement are women. Some are first generation, second generation, etc. For example, Ilhan Omar from Somalia, Rashida Tlaib, they make up part of the squad in the Congress, have been very vocal about these things. And what they're drawing from in their hatred of Western values is the experience that either they, their mother or grandmother had back in the North Africa or the Middle East or these other places that I've mentioned. Women who undergo this kind of treatment are going to respond one of two ways. Either they're going to collapse into depression or want to commit suicide and actually do it, or they're going to come out fighting. When they come out fighting, they're going to adopt a radical form of feminism that begins to eat up all of the other associated lateral ideas such as LGBTQ, and the alphabet continues to grow there, and all the various and sundry things that are part of the leftist movement. So if we in America really want to address the problem of the cancel culture movement, I think that what I found in my research, and I kind of backed into it in a sense, is that the genesis of this problem is coming from the maltreatment and the abuse of these women in these nations that have come to America and are influencers in America through media, through politics, through business, and various other places, and are standing against Western values. And principally, they're standing against the Western values because of America's long-held association with Israel. That's another big part of the equation. So this novel, this fiction that includes the real stories of these women, is not just simply a novel about the abuse of women that's detached from America. Why should I care about that? It is the root, one of the serious root issues that has grown up, crossed the Atlantic, and has come to America, joined that other monster called leftism, and is now running amok through our government and our social media.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty profound. I would have never made that connection. So yeah. So you said you kind of backed into this. So would you say it was kind of like indirectly something you've kind of deduced from your other research that you started making these connections?
Yeah, it kind of caught my eye as I was listening more and more to the vaccine mandates and the CRT and various other things. I kept seeing and hearing Islamic voices. I began to ask myself also the other question. Just let me say parenthetically that I put notices about my book on things like Reddit, the social media platform, which has in my view, a lot of rather angry young people that are on the left. And I thought that they would, I didn't know anything about Reddit, and I thought that they would have some respect and interest in the book, but instead I was blasted being a white guy writing about brown people, particularly women, in foreign countries and in foreign cultures. And I really got a taste of this leftist jab at me and about the culture and about being a white person and an older white guy at that. And that got my attention. And I said, I've got to stop here for a moment. I've got to take a look at this. And that's when it began to occur to me of this linkage between the abuse of the women. Remember, going back to Genesis for a moment, that when the curses came there in Genesis chapter 3, it was going to be the seed of the devil versus the seed of the woman. And Galatians 4:4 tells us that in the right time, Jesus was born of what? Of a woman. And of course, he came as the bridegroom, and he loves his what? His bride. And so there is a consistent theme that we find even Adam and Eve, how Adam stood by while his wife was being picked apart in rhetoric by the devil. But Jesus, on the other hand, is the one who stands in the gap for his bride. He goes to the cross for her. He dies for her. He does everything for her. And I believe that in the world today, what we're seeing on the world stage is a visual picture of this spiritual war of the bride and the bridegroom. And that brings me to a whole different issue, which is how Christianity can answer that, which we can talk about perhaps a bit later. But it was really when I was really being jabbed at by the guys on Reddit, I began to think, you know what? There's another connection here I need to look at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. And yeah, Reddit. I've heard about Reddit. I haven't really been on there much, but I'm glad that it kind of gave you an eye opener to kind of these connections intertwined with all this. And it, and I know usually Muslim communities kind of come in and infiltrate in areas and kind of try to start working within their own culture. Is that kind of a fair thing to say? I guess experientially in my area, there's been a lot of Muslims that have moved from, I'm assuming, the Middle East to our area. I actually just have a neighbor that just moved in across the street from me, and he's a refugee, or he just came over from Afghanistan.
Right.
And so within our own community in Buffalo, New York, where I live, Western New York, there's been a very increasing rate of Muslim families and things like that. So do you think, because you mentioned they kind of are coming involved and being more involved in politics and all that, I was just wondering, well, I mean, I guess that's some kind of connection, correct?
Well, I think you'd be surprised, and anyone listening to this would be surprised. We know about the flood of illegal aliens coming over the Mexican border by the tens of thousands. Very quietly, however, the Biden administration is also working overseas. I have many, many contacts in the Middle East and in North Africa. And what the State Departments are doing is actually recruiting Muslim people to come to America. So if a Christian, for example, goes and applies for a visa and has all their paperwork in order, has checked off all the boxes that would normally be looked for, they will be denied. But the Muslim family that doesn't have all the boxes checked off, suddenly it's not important. And it's like they're rushed to the front of the line, and they're given a visa to Canada, to America specifically. So there's also planes coming in, not only from Mexico to Jacksonville, Florida. This was Ron DeSantis has just found out 70 different landings full of illegal aliens, but they're also coming from the Middle East right now and are being settled in various areas like Western Buffalo, New York. So there's a strategy involved here. There wouldn't be any reason for the administration to do this unless they thought that these people were going to be friendly to the plan. And indeed, many of them are, because they, as I say, when they have a very bad taste about Israel, about traditional structures such as republicanism, democracy, things like this, they come to America ready to fight on the side of the left to tear down the things that they were unable to tear down in North Africa or the Middle East without making the disassociation that American structures and values are not the same as they are in North Africa and the Middle East. So a lot of education, I think, is involved here at the same time.
Wow, yeah, that's profound. Yeah, and so one of your other questions we got here is, when the U.S. made that withdrawal from Afghanistan, and unraveling years of progress in the rights of women there, is that something that occurred during that time when they pulled out?
When America pulled out of Afghanistan, everybody was shocked, especially the women in Afghanistan, because within a very short amount of time, the forces that came in and took over the area demanded the women dress appropriately. Well, it had been 20 years. There were no hijabs. That's the veil. there's a variety of veils that the women wear, but the principal one is the hijab. There were no niqabs, which is the longer veil that has opening for the eyes. There were no burqas sitting in department stores, maybe only on the rarest occasion, but the whole population of Afghanistan's women was not able to dress appropriately according to the way the new standard set for them. And so if they were to continue into school, for example, rather than sit like we would sit in a university setting, men and women all intermixed with one another, dressing the way we like, the way you're dressed, the way I'm dressed, a curtain was drawn down the middle of the classroom, women on one side, men on the other, and all the women had to be dressing head to toe in either a burqa or a niqab or something like that. The burqa is the one that completely covers the eyes, but has a little bit of a screen so that at least they can see. That was a big problem, not only because they weren't able to get dressed appropriately, because if they weren't dressed appropriately within a certain amount of time, they'd be beaten in the streets, and many were. I have friends over there that said that women were assaulted, were raped openly in public, against cars, against buses, were absolutely brutalized. And most of our Western media was simply not willing to cover it, didn't want us to see it. The untold stories of what happened to women, many died within the first 2 weeks of that takeover over there, using weapons that we left behind in the billions of dollars, that it would absolutely shock the average American to learn what had happened over there to those ladies.
That's horrible. So, yeah, wow. That's so sad.
It's big.
Yeah. Why do you think media doesn't cover these things? I mean, I know maybe it's not completely speculative to think about that, but is it because it would hinder the agenda of doing what they're trying to accomplish here with all these big pullouts with specifically with Afghanistan? And then because a lot of the stuff you're mentioning, it doesn't kind of follow the narrative, so they don't really want to put it out there, correct?
Yeah, well, I think it goes all the way back to 9/11. I'm old enough to certainly remember that day. And one of the things that I recall very, very starkly was how the media jumped into the fray immediately, not to talk about specifics, as much as they wanted to level the playing field between all the religions and say, okay, so Muslims did this, but the Muslims are not the only bad people. And all of a sudden, the media became apologists for the Islamicists. Let me make a critical distinction here, and I want to be very, very clear about this. Not all Muslim people are bad. I have Muslim friends who are very close to me. We talk, they help me. There's 2 Muslim ladies that are helping me with Arabic at the moment. And there's reasons for that. I don't want to get too far away from this line of thought here, but just let me say that just like we have in America, we have like nominal Christians. There's something akin to nominal Muslims. They're cultural Muslims. They were born into a Muslim family, or they were born in Libya, and so therefore I am Muslim, something like that. And even those that are serious Muslims that I know are very much against the abusive tactics of many of the men toward the women, and all of the warfare that goes on in the world. So that said, I think the media has been a theologian at the same time, giving a universalistic interpretation of religions, so that the Christian religion is not allowed to pop its head up and say, look, there's no such thing as a Baptist honor killing. There's no such thing as Presbyterians driving planes into buildings in New York City. And so the Christianity has been taken down a bit so that these other religions, and this, in my view, is a religious spiritual warfare that's going on in America right now, is not permitted to be castigated for the various things that they do. And so I think there's been a bit of a blackout in that sense.
Gotcha. And I think one of the questions I threw at you earlier that we had to make a loop around, because we're talking about the cancel culture and all that, but back with the question, why do you believe domestic abuse is higher in Muslim families and marriages than in non-Muslim families?
Well, the answer to that question has been sought after for a long time, mainly through close analysis of the Quran and the Hadith, which are incidental sayings and statements of Muhammad. Those are the two principal documents that we have in our study of Islam. And people have sifted through these documents to try to find something akin to either bold statements about how women ought to be maltreated or not. And so scholars have gone back and forth on this. There is one surah or a verse, which would be the compatriot if you read your Bible, 424, which talks about, Muhammad is talking about women. In fact, there's an entire section in the Quran about women. But 424 is the most controversial. And there's a part in there where it says, if the women, I'm paraphrasing, are a little bit out of control, you have the right as a husband to get things back in control. Now, again, that's a paraphrase. There's a word in there that has been focused on, what does it mean? Does it mean discipline? What does correction mean in the Arabic word? And so you have commentators saying anything from, it means to take a blade of grass and to touch her across the face. Well, I can tell you, I've seen enough pictures of people I don't know and people I do know who have been beaten to a pulp, and it certainly wasn't by a blade of grass being put across their face. Or it can mean just simple discipline. And Muhammad does talk about in the Quran not brutalizing the face, not hurting her face, but other parts of her body to get her to go along with what it is that you want. Well, if that's all there is, and that certainly is enough for some people. And also, I might add, in the farewell address of Muhammad before he died, he decided to say some things about women, how they are equal to men, and yet at the same time intellectually inferior. And a very mild statement about discipline comes in again in his farewell address. Well, I looked at these documents and I said to myself, this is slim pickings. People are trying to squeeze a lot of juice out of this orange if we're going to find a big documentary justification for the top-down command and control of the men over the women. So I sat back for a minute and I just thought for a moment, and what occurred to me is this. It's the theology. It's the general theology of Islam that has given rise to this. What we need to remember as Christians is that Allah in Islam does not have a body. There is no second person of the Trinity who came into the world to die for a people and to gather them from the four corners of the world, north, south, east, and west, and to create a body of Christ, which has this relationship of what I said earlier, the bride and the bridegroom. Without that perfect paradigm of the bride loving and dying for the bridegroom, dying and loving the bride, there's a complete vacuum in Islam with respect to how for the men to relate to the women. There is no paradigm. There's absolutely nothing. Now, if you throw in a little philosophy in this, what you find is that in the earliest days of Islam, it was highly influenced by Gnosticism. This idea that salvation is a matter of ascending to higher and higher levels of knowledge, to spirituality. And so there is a spectrum from the lower parts of the material world, which are considered evil, to the higher parts of the spiritual world, which are considered good. And salvation is a matter of disentangling oneself from the material world, beating it down, in fact, and ascending to these higher levels of spirituality. Well, in a man-woman, husband-wife relationship, who's at the bottom? It's not the men. This is an honor-shame society where the men receive the honor, and as it appears that the women receive the shame. So it's the woman who is to be disentangled, who is to be beat down, who is to be disciplined, who is to be put in her place, so the man can reach these higher and higher levels of knowledge to spirituality, to his own redemption and salvation, where he's going to find 70 virgins waiting for him. So if you put the philosophy and the theology together, you begin to create a fuller worldview of Islam that gives us some idea of why this is happening.
That's really helpful, John. And then you mentioned too that it seems, you mentioned earlier that the one woman that you spoke with was not completely on board with talking about some of the abuse and things like that. What do you think is the reason why some are unwilling to acknowledge and talk about these things in their communities?
It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They know about it. They're aware of it. And but they just don't really want to face it, or if they do face it, they rationalize it away by saying there's abuse everywhere. It is a sad thing, and I think it takes us to Romans chapter 1, where Paul says that there's a self-deception involved. When people turn from the Creator, what do they turn to? They turn to the creature, and they worship these sorts of things, and they're in a kind of self-deception about God. Now, if you can be in a self-deception about God, you can be in a self-deception about anything. And so they simply don't want to talk about it. What happened in this particular case with Rahab, and the name is in various ways in the Middle East, Rahab, etc., is that my friend who introduced me to her, he's from Germany, she began to talk about ways in which Islam is very generous to women and all these sorts of things. But then she talked herself into a box, into a corner. And I watched how she did it. She began to talk about how the community can devalue a woman if she has a baby out of wedlock. She can be isolated. She can be a pariah if she's not a virgin. In these parts of the world, if a man discovers that his wife is not a virgin at marriage, he can divorce her. That's grounds for divorce right there. And so as I listened to her, she talked herself into a corner and was actually saying things that were the exact opposite of what she said in the beginning. And this is just part of what irrationalism does. When you deny the Creator and you start worshiping the creation and you start rationalizing things, is that you find yourself in a circular argument that comes out and bites you in a place that you don't want. And that's true with secular thought in general. It simply can't hold up under testing.
Yeah. I think that's even a very helpful thing, because we have an apologetic bent to our show, specifically from presuppositional methodology. We talk a lot about worldview and talk a lot about the Christian worldview as to opposing worldview systems, and try to point out the irrationalism or pure rationalism that ends up denying the Creator, right? So,
all very Van Tillian.
Yes. Yeah, we are. Yeah. Are you?
I am. Yes.
All right. Great.
I'm at Van Til.
Yeah, I could kind of starting to pick up on some of your languages. Like that sounds well, first and foremost, biblical, right? Let's say get that out of the way.
Right,
Van Til,
right.
Bible, yeah. But thankfully, Van Til helped us get back to the Bible in regards to that stuff. So you also here, do you believe in the status, say specifically in these places you've been, do you believe that the status of women in the country is a good barometer or barometer of a country's progress? In other words, do women matter to what's going on in building a country or having a healthy culture and country, sort of say?
Oh, absolutely. We're thinking about the Bible here. If we go to the first two chapters of Genesis, we have a cultural mandate.
Mm.
What Klaas Schilder, the great Dutch theologian, called the cultural mandate. And coming out of Genesis 1:26, 7, 8, and 2:15, in which the original couple was given dominion over the creation to craft from it cultures. And that's what cultures are. They are the beginning with the raw material of creation. And from that, crafting all the various areas that we call culture. Everything boils down to the original creation. So it wasn't just Adam. It was the original couple. And within the creation mandates, we have the sexual mandate, without which the cultural mandate would be impossible. And so the woman is very much central to the building of nations. And as I said previously at the very beginning, it's absolutely impossible to step on or to abuse or to beat down one half, give or take, of your society and expect your society and culture to flourish. Women are being permitted more and more now because of economic pressures in North Africa and the Middle East to work and to go to school, get higher education and do these sorts of things. And many of us in the West look at this and we think, oh boy, things are improving over there, but really it's a facade. The women are still on a tether. It's just that the men are allowing the line to go out more and more. They're giving them to run free for a bit. To use that phrase in fishing, my father told me when it pulls too hard, you got to let them go out. But the idea here with the guys is that when you come home, don't think that you're different. Things are still the same. You're still under the thumb of the imperialistic man in the house. And you can be beaten, you can be raped, you can do anything you want, just to let you know, just to remind you who's in charge. And so they're not free to go into higher levels of education or free to do all these various areas of work. Really, it's simply an extension of the man's permission to do these things. But in principle, the idea of submission and a very evil kind of submission. I'm not talking about patriarchalism or a complementarianism as we discuss in America between couples. I'm talking about a very dominating, hurtful, crushing kind of dominance that takes place in these countries, particularly Yemen. I had a conversation this evening with a young lady in Yemen who told me that whereas in other countries, families might hope for young girls because it's a moneymaker, and I'll get to that in just a second. But in Yemen, if it's a girl who's coming, they kill it. They simply abort it because it's not even worth having. So the women, as they're working, we have to understand that that it's for the man. It's not for the woman. It's not for the family. It's for the man. It's been said that these women can't get free because they need the men. It's actually the opposite. It's the men who need the women. So even though the number of women in polygamy has been dropped down to 4, in all of these countries, they can have no more than 4 wives. It's business to the men because he sends the 4 out to do work and their various capacities, and he sits in a cafe all day or out front smoking cigarettes or smoking the shisha pipe. And then when the women come home, they give him 90% of their earnings at the end of the week or the month. And then he gives them a little bit. So it's actually a business proposition for them. So what happens is that the economy in these nations becomes so personalized and so corrupt and so viciously attacking upon the women that the only reason they're working is not for a family or for a future, but so the man can sit in a cafe and smoke cigarettes, that we never see any progress in these nations.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. So kind of banking on, we're just talking about men. Do you think Muhammad has a role in his, based upon Muhammad's own marriages and writings, does that contribute a lot to how these men would end up going on to treat their own families, specifically their wives? And
well, I talked a minute ago about Muhammad's writings, the Quran and Hadith.
Correct. Yeah.
And although there are some indicators that would suggest a permissiveness to take a hand with the woman, or the women generally, it's not a document that's replete with saying after saying about this sort of a thing that would certainly justify the kind of thing that we're seeing today with women in these countries. I tend to think that his own marriage, the story of Aisha, his very first wife, of course, he had a harem of many hundreds, if not thousands of women, but his most prized possession was a young girl named Aisha, who he fell in love with when she was 6 years old. And he had intercourse with her when she was 9 years old. Now, by our standards, we call that pedophilia. And then he married her formally later on. But certainly, if the principal prophet, who is said to fill out the revelation of Jesus Christ, which was left incomplete, and he is the pinnacle, he is the top of all the revelation that God is ever going to give. He is the final word, certainly the way we would look at the life of Jesus to emulate. Paul says to imitate me as I imitate Christ. If we were to imitate that in any sense of the word, even come close to it, we would be living a life of debauchery. And so I do think that there is a way in which we could say that his character, the way it worked itself out, the way he lived, is certainly a beacon call to these men who respect him to do the same.
Yeah. And obviously too, these Muslims and Christians are pulling from two different authorities, ultimate authorities specifically. And so in regards to that, what would you say the big differences are, the major differences between how women are treated in Christianity as opposed to Islam?
Well, I think that, as I said, we have this wonderful picture, and Paul talks about it so very, very clearly, about husbands are to love our wives the way Christ loves the church, and the women, there's to be a respect to that authority in a submissiveness. Now, I was a pastor for many years before I went on the mission field and had opportunity to talk to people about this very thing, about what Paul is teaching. And the women will say, well, is that just, a barren submission to authority, wherever he says goes? And I say to them, no, he has to earn that through his love for you. He has to have a respect in your life and a touch in your life that he has loved you, sacrificed himself so much for you as Christ has sacrificed himself for the church. Now, it's not to die, literally, for the sins of someone, but to give of himself lovingly, relentlessly, passionately in various and other circumstances to do as Peter says, husbands, love your wives, period. And to the extent that he does that, the woman wants to follow this man. She wants to be by his side. She wants to cooperate with him. They're not just two people. You know, one of the things parenthetically that I find so distracting in this culture war is to say about homosexual people can be married, they can be partners. Well, marriage is not a partnership because a partner is two. Partners are two. In marriage, it's one. They become one individual. When you take a glass of water and you pour something in it and you mix it, the water is not the same. The stuff that you poured in it is not the same. You've created something new. It has a new identity, and it's this beautiful thing called marriage. Now, in Islam, not only is there a separation between the man and the woman, as it's a top-down command and control environment over her, and for some of the reasons that I gave, but I think there are others as well. There is nothing, zero, that he is going to do generally that's going to win her heart. Now, let me say again, this is not true of all Muslims. It's not true of all Arabs. There are many, we can't use a broad brush here on an entire religion and entire movement. There are great, loving, giving fathers, husbands in families that could probably be a paradigm for many Christian individuals in as far as how they behave and act in the home. But there's just too high of a percentage of Islamicist individuals who just beat down the wife. She's just there to cook and to clean. And the more women you have, even the mother-in-law will dominate the new wife until she's able to have her own children. Did you know that in this part of the world, which compromises about 30% of the earth, that a young woman is not considered a true woman until she's married and had children? She is not given that respect. And then when she becomes a mother-in-law, she can dominate her own daughters-in-law. So the system of dominance, it's perpetuating not only men over women, but women over women. And it is not a loving relationship. And if I may say that even though evangelism is illegal in these parts of the world, particularly in places like Libya, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, to proselytize, I find ways of doing it by just being a friend. And the number one thing that these people, these beautiful people, will respond to is your love. The love of Christ being shown through you. They don't want to hear apologetics. They don't want to hear arguments. Some of them will argue with you. They've got great apologetics, Islamic apologetics against Christians. You know, you worship three gods or things like this. But the thing that they respond to is the thing that they've never been given and never been shown. And that's the love of Christ coming through you, through your eyes, through your touch, through your words. They will respond to that.
That's incredible. And it's good to hear. Yeah. And so you wrote this book as a novel, John, and you refer to it as a call to action. Why? And what are some things that me and our listeners can learn from this, and what exactly can we do about it?
Well, one of the things that I have done is find friendships on social media, Facebook. I just put out a little post the other day. It was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke that I think over 3/4 of my friends now are in North Africa or in Egypt. It seems like I can't find American friends on my list anymore. But here's the thing about it is that I am in regular conversation every single day with young women who are being abused. Now, there are organizations like Amnesty International that will look at the abuse of individuals simply on a human rights level, but there's also Voice of the Martyrs. Remember, it's not just Muslim people. In Arab lands, we're dealing with a lot of Christians out there. And if a family finds out that a young woman has become a Christian, she could be dead. I had a long, beautiful conversation 2 years ago in Tunis with a young woman who it was finally found out by the family that she's a Christian, and they locked her in the house, and she escaped the house. And I met her deep in the Medina, the old city of Tunis, in a little cafe, and I encouraged her and I talked to her. And you know that the day I was just in Tunis 2 weeks ago. The night before I left, who do I run into in the street? It was Sarah, the same girl. And she told me how the whole story about how the family finally let her go, but she is ostracized from the family. And again, we sat on a park bench in the middle of downtown Tunis, and I encouraged her. I want to encourage people to just find these simple ways. Maybe you can't travel to Tunis or to Benghazi, but you can get on Facebook or social media and some other ways. You can make relationships with these people, and all they need to hear is, I love you, I care for you, I'm praying for you. Or you can get involved with church missions to these various areas, and gender, religious freedom organizations, Voice of the Martyrs, things like that. All of them are working very diligently in these areas.
That's great. So specifically, I guess a question I would have, like on Facebook, I have a hard time discerning between fake people and real people specifically. Right. Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of it too. But yeah. Is there any way that we can best discern if we're genuinely helping someone or just going along with a possible scam? How do we be wise in that?
Well, I will begin the conversation and the relationship. And I mean, I know that so many of these young ladies, they just simply want a visa. They want an American husband or something like that. I think once a month at least, I'm asked, if I will marry someone. It's so sad sometimes. A young lady will say, I'll give you everything I have if you just get me out of Algeria. So they want money or they want whatever it is. And for me, I'm not willing to cut off the relationship for the sake of being able to continue to show love to them and encouragement. And sometimes there's a little bit of a rough wave that I have to go through with them, but they will stay with me because they can see that I care about them, even through the words, even through the writing. Even though it's not face to face. And I would say that every single day for the last year or year and a half, I am in virtually every day, I'm in contact with 2, 3, sometimes 4, who will contact me and for a word of encouragement, and I'll talk with them.
Yeah, that's really helpful, John. And it's just it's really sad and unfortunate, and how women are treated in these differing places. Did you have anything off script that you wanted to kind of talk more about, John, or anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, I'm just a few hours ago, I learned of a really deplorable situation that I'm surprised I'm just learning about it now. Egypt is one of the places where I've taught. There's a school in Alexandria, Egypt, where I've taught 3 times. And I love Egypt. Egypt was affected by the Arab Spring that started in Tunis. And, Morsi came into power, but he was a hardline extremist Muslim. And so General Sisi came in. Everybody thought that reforms were going in the right direction. Well, 10 women who are influencers on social media talking about politics, social issues, and particularly about the treatment of women in Egypt, were all arrested about a year ago, rounded up and sent into prison, literally political prisoners. And 4 of them have now been sentenced to 2 to 3 years in jail and heavy fines, and the other 6 are waiting to be sentenced. Now, this is Egypt, which has been one of the more progressive countries in the MENA region, MENA, Middle East, North Africa. And what were they doing? They were simply expressing their views on social media. And I think that we have to be very, very careful about the way in which tides are shifting in these countries. Again, as I said in the very beginning, these tides will come and affect America in our cultural give and take over here. But we also need to understand that many of the changes that appear to be happening in these countries in favor of women, some of them are just merely superficial. The United Nations will throw money at these countries, and the countries will say, okay, we changed some laws. But those are secular laws. Underneath are the religious laws. And those are the religious laws that really run things and run the country. And if the imams or whoever is in charge of the mosque or the prelates decide that they're against these things, they're not going to happen. So again, about the question about being fooled by individuals, we can be fooled by nations when in fact things are not changing. And Egypt, I think, is a perfect example.
Wow. Yeah. 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 I had an aunt who was a missionary in Egypt for Christ for the Nations way back. Probably 20, 30 years ago. But yeah, she used to go out in Egypt and whatnot. And she made, and still some friends she's friends with till today from Egypt. But yeah, John, this has been really good. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And I hope that me and our listeners will be able to be a blessing and possibly help some of these people and just encouraging and loving them. Is there any like Facebook groups or anything like that where people can get connected with these people, or what's the best way that you've found, I guess, strategies for finding people to encourage and talk to?
You know, literally any young woman that you find in North Africa or the Middle East, I mean, it's like throwing a pebble into the water and wondering if it's going to get wet. You are going to find a young woman who's been abused. The rate of abuse is extremely high, and once you make friends with her, you're into a community of people. There are some places on Facebook and other social media sites that deal with persecution of Christians, of individuals generally. But that's just how I began. I just began by befriending some of them. And before I knew it, the dominoes just began to fall one right after the other. And I had 1,000 friends.
Yeah. So it's not hard. Yeah.
No, it's not hard. And one of those friends just invited me to Morocco. And I taught a 3-day conference over there, 9 hours a day, 25 young people. And it was one of the most powerful, spirit-filled conferences I've been teaching a long time, I have ever experienced in my life. And it just began, just plant the seed. That's all you got to do. Just get started.
Great. Good stuff. What were you, was it a conference, or you said a teaching, you did 9 hours for how many days? 3 days, you said?
3 days. Yeah.
Great. Are these are these people just learning about Christianity specifically, or are they going, is it like a ministry that,
well, these are Christians from, house churches, because Christianity for the people that live in these different countries is illegal. Big churches that you see in Benghazi or Tunis or Casablanca are only for foreigners.
Mm.
The native people are to stay away from there. So they meet circuitously in house churches. So on occasion, so all these house churches will come together into a conference setting, and 40 people or 25 people for them is like a Ligonier conference for us here in the United States, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a major blessing for me to be able to go over there and to teach about how everything in our Christian walk is, as Paul says, in Christ. And so we talked about the centrality of Christ in all things. So it was a big time with them.
That's incredible too. And I bet they're so excited and pretty hyped about it. And then that kind of gets you excited too, you know, when you see everyone else so focused and wanting to be there, you know.
Oh yeah. When you see when I'm teaching, I can usually discern, you know, who's keeping up with me. And everybody was on board in that room. And you could just see the lights go on and on in their heads. And something I typically don't see in American colleges when I used to teach there. So it's a beautiful thing. They're hungry. They want teaching. They absorb it like a dry sponge. It's a wonderful thing. They want me to come back. I'd love to come back.
That's great.
In fact, they asked me to come back for a year. I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah. Then you could do 9 hours every day, you know, for a year.
Yeah, for a year. No, I would be the dry sponge then.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, John, and so thankful for how the Lord's using you specifically in his providential leading in these conversations and these these travels you've been doing and the research and the teaching. And it's all just such a great encouragement to me personally, John. So thank you for the work that you're doing through the Holy Spirit. And it's been very encouraging to hear these things. And I hope that me and the other listeners, my co-hosts, can help kind of, see the importance of this and kind of see what we can do to love and encourage these women that are being abused and maltreated and mistreated, and hopes that they'd find peace and rest in Christ. Right. So thank you, John.
I hope that people will take a look at this novel, The Trees Have Goats. It's on Amazon.
Gotcha. Is it just mainly, you have Kindle and soft cover?
Kindle is available on the Amazon site. I have a website, johnbarberbooks.com. It's available there, and it's at Barnes & Noble.
Okay, great. And I'll provide links for that for the listeners so they can have an easy way to get to it and able to purchase it. So so John, thank you so much. Did you have any last parting words?
No, I just want to thank you so much for letting me on and sharing with your audience. It's been a blessing to me.
Thank you, John. And we're always glad and encourage anything we can do to help people like you out there doing these things and get the word out. So thank you, John. So without further ado, this is Rooted in Revelation podcast, where we seek to make God's revelation our foundation in all life. And until next time, God bless.